Good morning and welcome to Morning Scoop for Monday, July 26th. This is your daily Buckeye Fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 38 days, the game against Michigan in 124 days. There's an awful lot of major changes happening all at once in the college football world right now, from NIL to the one-time transfer rule, the Alston case, and what sure seems like the rapidly accelerating demise of the NCAA. And now you can add conference realignment to that list. Monday, Oklahoma and Texas are expected to formally notify the Big 12 that they intend to leave the conference and head to the SEC. There is an awful lot to unpack here, including what the Big Ten could do to respond. So I wanted to bring in Buckeye Scoop's ultimate insider, Nevada Buck, to break it all down. First, Nevada, from what you've reported, it sounds like there was a chance that the Sooners and Longhorns could have actually ended up in the Big Ten instead of the SEC.
Yeah, Tom, thanks for having me on the show. As we reported on Buckeye Scoop back in February, the Big Ten Expansion Committee had started ramping up their efforts again, and for the first time in over 2 years back in February. And that was curious at the time because the timing just seemed a little odd. And apparently what had happened is that the Montauk group out of New York had approached the Big with the idea, the concept of Oklahoma and Texas were willing to leave the Big 12. And had presented that to the Big Ten at the same time. I don't believe this was before, but I believe it's at the same time that they were presenting this to the SEC. And the Big Ten was not interested in Oklahoma, was very interested in Texas, but not interested in Oklahoma because Oklahoma was not an AAU member. AAU, for people that aren't familiar, it's basically like an academic accreditation and research accreditation designation that, only there's a list of AAU members, and Oklahoma's not one of those. And they didn't feel like they met the academic profile and research profile of the other Big Ten institutions. And so they weren't interested in Oklahoma. And so a pairing of Oklahoma, Texas then became untenable. And the possibility of them moving to the Big Ten at that point died. So, very, very interesting because it's a seismic shift for college football, and certainly could have had a different outcome, but as it looks like it's definitely happening to the SEC and probably happening Monday or Tuesday.
And yeah, the every current Big Ten member is a member of the AAU, with the exception of Nebraska. They were a member, then they lost their accreditation. It had to do with where their hospital was located, and it wasn't located on the main campus in Lincoln. It was, I think it's in Omaha. So, but they're in the process of getting certified again. But not being certified as a member of the AAU is a pretty big deal for the Big Ten. People, I think of this as, well, this is a good football team, they should want to add them. It's like, well, it's not the athletic directors or football coaches voting on this; it's the university presidents. So there is a lot of academic piece that does make a play into the decision here, whether people think it should or like it or not. So. But, one thing you've talked about in just the last couple of days that was very interesting to me is the role of Fox in all of this. The Big Ten is a major, major property for them. The Big 12 was one of their other major properties, and seems like that might not be as valuable a property very soon as it probably was last year. So they really need the Big Ten to be strong and continue to be probably their flagship broadcast partner. So what kind of role is Fox playing right now in all of this?
Well, an expanded role, a much, much, much larger role than I ever dreamed that they would. I mean, Fox was a major cog in getting the Big Ten to play last year. If you remember when we were breaking news, a lot of that stuff was coming from Fox, because Fox was looking at what was happening, recognizing the impact, and really, driving kind of the return to play initiative for the Big Ten. Now with expansion, it's a full-on war between Fox and ABC, ESPN. And Fox realizes there's a little bit of a vacuum of leadership at the top of the Big Ten. You don't have a Jim Delaney there. You don't have kind of that dynamic leader. I mean, as much as I'll state the obvious, but Kevin Warren isn't that guy. And Fox has realized that, and Fox is taking a very aggressive role. And the beauty of that is, that way it gives a lot of these member institutions some plausible deniability as well, because they can say, we haven't had contact, we haven't made conversations, but their broadcast partner has. Kind of the way that coaches use their agent. The member institutions that are interested are using Fox as kind of that vehicle to drive these conversations with the Big Ten, and those are ongoing and intensifying. And it's it's something that every day there seems to be a new name popping up, but Fox is absolutely driving the bus.
Well, some of the names that have been floated are Pac-12, Pac-12 schools, or sorry, Big 12 schools who, I think the Titanic is sinking and they're right now hanging onto the piece of wood in the middle of the North Atlantic looking for anything, any boat to climb onto. You've seen reporters floating the idea that Oklahoma State and Kansas and Iowa State are all talking to the Big Ten. I assume that, yes, they probably are talking to the Big Ten, but do you put any stock into the thought that like Oklahoma State is about to be a new member of the Big Ten?
Look, in this, you never say never, but that I have not heard that, nor does that make a lot of sense to me. I think of those three schools, the one that you might potentially be able to make an argument for is Kansas. Given their geography, them being an AAU member, and I think culturally they'd probably be a good fit with the Big Ten. But Iowa State doesn't really add anything to you, despite being an AAU member, and Oklahoma State definitely doesn't add anything. So, it'd be hard to justify turning away Oklahoma, but then accepting Oklahoma State. Those would seemingly be incongruent positions. And so I don't put a lot of stock in that. I think there's just a lot of conversations going on, and as you said, the Big 12 realizes they're done, and those guys have got to find a home. They've got to find a way to stay relevant and stay in the college football conversation. So they're having conversations, and I would expect that to be ongoing.
There were 4 teams that you listed in a recent report on Buckeye Scoop from the Pac-12, which is kind of, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 have kind of had a relationship for a long time, centered on the Rose Bowl, but they had that scheduling agreement that didn't actually end up coming to pass a couple of years ago. And they were the ones that were kind of closely in alignment last year on not playing the season until they did play the season. But there were 4 Pac-12 schools that you said sounds like are interested and in communication with the Big Ten. Can you let people know what those schools are and, why that might make sense from the Big Ten's perspective?
Those 4 schools are USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Colorado. And those are conversations that are absolutely happening and ongoing. And I would say that the one that's the most strident about this, the one that's kind of, I wouldn't say leading the charge, but certainly is at the point, is USC. And, USC has been really unhappy with what's happened with their role in the Pac-12. I think they see this as an opportunity for them to go onto a larger scale. I mean, Pac-12 football and sports in general has been kind of down, and USC feels like they need to up their profile. They're a private institution, so they don't have a lot of the restrictions of some of these public institutions have. More of the political considerations. But those 4 schools have been in contact. And, if you think about that, for the Big Ten now would be going coast to coast, literally from the Pacific to the Atlantic. They'd be playing, Big Ten football. And that would be an interesting counter to what the masterstroke that the SEC just did with adding Oklahoma and Texas. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
The Pac-12 for a number of years, I mean, you mentioned Kevin Warren not being a universally popular figure earlier. The Pac-12 for a number of years was run by Larry Scott, who was like, basically Kevin Warren on the beach, more or less, where he was a very, very not popular figure due to a number of decisions that he made over the years, and putting the Pac-12 headquarters in a very, very expensive building in San Francisco, and the way they did their network deal and trying to retain all of the rights to all the programming, and therefore not being able to get on a bunch of cable systems and satellite systems, and costing his league members a lot of money. He's now gone. So now there's a new guy in charge. He is the new Pac-12 commissioner is George Kliavkoff. I know you don't know him personally, but it sounds like you know some people who know him, or know some people who know some people. What should people know about him? What have you heard about him in terms of the type of person he is, his background, and how that might maybe play into this kind of conversation?
Well, George Kliavkoff is a really smart guy, and whereas Scott was a little bit laid back and maybe wasn't a killer, and George has got a reputation as a very aggressive guy and a very, very smart guy, and he's the type of leader that you want in a situation like this, where it's calling for big, bold kind of master strokes. He's been in the big room. He knows how to do something. I mean, he's not an empty suit. That guy, he's formidable. He's inexperienced, and he doesn't really have the profile of, say a Greg Sankey or somebody who's been around, or a Jim Delaney who, is just a giant in the field. But he's the one wild card in this, because if anybody could keep the Pac-12 together, it would be him, just due to his strength of personality, the reputation that he has, within the Pac-12 already, as just a guy that's, he's got a vision. He's got a vision for them. I would expect them to try to counter, these moves with, big proposals of their own. I'd imagine they'd be going after a lot of those Big 12 schools. They're not quite as concerned about the academic reputation. Not saying that the Big Ten is Harvard, or I'm trying to make that silly Michigan argument, but I think they'll be aggressively looking to expand as well to try to countermand other people trying to poach their best members. So it's going to be a battle, and he's going to be a very worthy adversary for sure.
Closer to home on the commissioner front, there was a real interesting tweet from our buddy Clay Hall at ABC6 in Columbus on Friday from the Big Ten Media Days. I'm just going to read it to you, and then I want your thoughts. Gene Smith was on the Big Ten Advisory Committee when the league commissioner was being researched and vetted. Kevin Warren's name was not on the list submitted to Big Ten presidents by the committee. Now, Nevada, there were a couple things that jumped out to me. One, that was true, but far more than that Gene Smith said that on the record to a reporter on TV, in front of a TV camera. What does that say to you?
Well, it was, to me, knowing Gene Smith the way that I do, and I have had interactions with Gene for years, that was not a throwaway. And Gene's very careful, and he picks his words very carefully, and he never says anything that there's not a purpose to what he's saying. So that was not a throwaway line. To me, it seemed like a shot across the bow to Kevin Warren, and I took it that way. I thought that was very interesting that didn't get more run, locally or nationally, because that's a heck of a statement if you really dive into it. And I think Gene is kind of putting Kevin Warren on notice that he's got to step up. He's got to step up and bring his A game right now, because I wouldn't say that Ohio State's in any peril right now, but the Big Ten, they've always considered themselves to be the premier football conference, or one of the, you can make the arguments back and forth to the SEC. But right now, it seems pretty clear the SEC has moved ahead, and the issue on the table is what are you going to do? How do you counter this? What are you going to do? And are you bold enough to make a move to counter what just happened? And I think that was a very interesting statement by Gene. And if I was Kevin Warren, I would definitely be paying attention to it.
Yeah, this does just feel like a monumental moment in the, for the future of the sport of college football, where, we have been in the Power 5 conference era for, the last, 10 years or so. So, basically the start of the playoff era, they had the Power 5 conferences, and there was this very clear dividing line between them and then the Group of 5, with the Big 12 now potentially drying up and blowing away, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, and then everyone else kind of maybe looking for safety anywhere they can find it. Now you're down to maybe the Power 4, and if the Big 10 can maybe pull some people out of the Pac-12, then maybe you're going down to the Power 4, Power 3, and does it turn into the Power 2? Like, how monumental of a moment is this, and how significant, how do you see this sort of playing out in terms of, the long rumored super conferences thing? It seems like it might actually be here or on its way.
Well, I think, all these steps, if you just, I think sometimes you have to take when there's a lot of things happening, you have to take a step back and kind of look at all these things like NIL and, the transfer portal, and these expansion and the move toward mega conferences and things. And I think, like it or not, college football as we've known it is changing. And I think that college, if you look out in the future, 10, 15, 20 years, college football to me is going to look a lot more like professional football. And I as a traditionalist, as a guy who loves college football more than any other sport in the world, I'm saddened by that. that part of it's exciting, but, playoff expansion and all these other things. I think that what you're moving towards is almost like a professional football model that doesn't involve the NCAA and is controlled solely by the conferences. I think the NCAA I'm not really sure what purpose that they serve, and I'm not sure that they have a role going forward. And, I think that's what all these things mean. And, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for college football, but I accept the inevitability of the change. But I think we are looking at radical change to college football, and I don't think the game's going to look anything like it does now a couple decades from now.
Yeah, this is very much the may you live in interesting times blessing / curse of college football. There is a lot going on right now, and a whole lot of different on a whole lot of different fronts, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how this all plays out. But Nevada, I do appreciate you taking the time to fill our listeners in on what you're hearing and what's kind of going on behind the scenes, because this is going to be a story I think we're going to be talking about quite a bit for the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, and probably beyond.
Yeah, it's going to be it's like I said, it is a crazy time, and I'm trying to embrace the change and look, I'm just trying to figure out what the impact's going to be on NIL, and then you hit us with expansion. So it's a lot for people to do, but I think we've just got to sit back and let the dust settle on this. But for people that like expansion, I would stay tuned and really keep an eye on things, because I think expansion is going to be hot and heavy, and it's going to be quick. So keep an eye out for that.
Well, a good place to keep an eye out for that will be on the Ask the Insiders board at BuckeyeScoop.com. Nevada has had a number of reports. We touched on some of them on this show, but not nearly all of them. He's had a bunch of insights in the last week from talking to his folks, talking to his wise men and other folks he knows in pretty highly placed spots around the nation and around the game of college football. And if you want to get access to all of that, you have to become a member of BuckeyeScoop.com. Just sign up today. You get access to our Nevada's information, as well as our entire team of insiders. Lots of great information, lots of great insight. And, we're only like 2 weeks away from the start of fall camp. I mean, maybe 1 week away from the start of fall camp. Yeah, I think 1 week away from the start of fall camp. Goodness, it is sneaking up on me. August 3rd is the start of Ohio State fall camp. That's coming up in a week. So it is, football season is coming very quickly. We are about a month away from the start of the season for Ohio State's first game at Minnesota. There is a lot going on. And you can check it all out at BuckeyeScoop.com. Also, make sure you check out all of our podcasts. You can get them on whatever podcast platform you like. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of our shows. You can subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating or review. That will help other folks find those shows as well, which we always appreciate. And finally, YouTube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Again, you can find our shows there. You can also find all of our interviews there. We streamed live all of the interviews with players and Ohio State coaches at Big Ten Media Days. So Ryan Day, Thayer Munford, Zach Harrison, Jeremy Ruckert. You can see those all in their entirety at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Subscribe right there, and then you get notified every time we post a new show, every time we go live somewhere. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming up in the next month, and as the season starts, so you're going to want to make sure you get it all. It's all free. It's all at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. All you have to do is subscribe. So that'll do it for today. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.